Millionaire hires a fake date for his ex's engagement party, but she steals the show. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's jump right into the story. The luxurious restaurant was buzzing with chatter, the soft clink of silverware echoing across the room, and the warm glow of chandeliers casting a golden hue over the guests. The night was supposed to be a celebration, but for Rachel, it felt like a stage for her to play a role she never asked for. Dressed in a sparkling black dress, she scanned the crowd with nerves creeping up her spine. She wasn't used to places like this. She had spent most of her life waiting tables, just barely scraping by. So standing in the middle of this high-class event, surrounded by people who looked like they belonged, felt alien to her. But she had a job to do tonight. A job she couldn't refuse. A millionaire had hired her to be his date. She wasn't here for love, just for the paycheck. She still couldn't believe it, but here she was, about to walk into an engagement party for his ex. She had no idea how it had all happened. Just a few days ago, she was working a shift at a diner when a man in a sharp suit walked in. He'd ordered a coffee, paid generously, and left her a huge tip. Then he asked her, out of nowhere, "Would you like to accompany me to an engagement party this weekend? I need someone to play the role of my girlfriend." It was bizarre, but the money he promised was more than she'd make in a month of hard work. And so, against her better judgment, she agreed. Now, standing in the crowd, she felt the weight of the decision. Was it worth it? As she stood there, waiting, her mind raced. She had been given instructions to act the part, smile, be charming, and avoid asking questions. But it felt wrong. She wasn't some trophy date, and yet here she was, pretending to be one for a man she barely knew. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on him. James. Tall, handsome, with a calm but commanding presence. He was standing near the bar, talking to a few people, his sharp suit hugging his frame just right. He caught her eye, and for a split second, she saw something unexpected. Guilt, maybe? Or was it just discomfort? He smiled at her, a tight, practiced smile, as if it was part of a script. She gave a small wave and walked toward him. He noticed her approach and straightened up, putting on his usual cool demeanor. "Rachel," he said, his voice smooth. "You look stunning tonight." Rachel smiled awkwardly, feeling a bit out of place. "Thanks, James," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "This is all a bit overwhelming." "I know," he said, his eyes softening. "But you're doing great." Rachel nodded, unsure of what else to say. This was a game, one she had to play, whether she liked it or not. As the night wore on, she stayed by James's side, listening to conversations she barely understood and laughing at jokes she didn't find funny. But then, something shifted. When the host made a toast, James pulled her closer, his hand gently resting on her back. She stiffened at first, but then, as if by instinct, she leaned into him. The warmth of his touch grounded her in that moment, and for a brief second, she almost forgot that this was all just a performance. He seemed to notice, too, and his gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. The crowd was loud, but in that small moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. It felt real. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the moment ended. They were back in the crowd, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses. Rachel's heart was racing. What was this? Was this just part of the job? Or was it something more? The night dragged on, and just when Rachel thought she was getting used to her role, she noticed a familiar face. Standing across the room, she spotted an ex-girlfriend of James's, a woman she recognized from his social media pages. The woman's eyes locked with Rachel's, and for a split second, Rachel saw a flash of recognition. The woman was glaring at her. No, not just glaring, seething. She wasn't supposed to be here. This was her night, her moment. Rachel could feel the tension rising. But just as quickly as the moment had started, James was beside her again, his hand resting at the small of her back, as if nothing had happened. "Don't worry about her," he whispered in her ear. "Just focus on the night. On us." But Rachel wasn't so sure anymore. The night had already taken a turn she hadn't expected. Was she really just a pawn in his game? Or was there something else she hadn't seen yet? Her thoughts were interrupted by the loud clink of a glass being raised for another toast. To new beginnings, someone shouted, and everyone followed suit. James raised his glass, and Rachel reluctantly followed, her heart still racing with questions. But as the champagne bubbled in her glass, she knew one thing for sure. Tonight wasn't going to be as simple as she'd thought. What was about to unfold would change everything. As the night continued, Rachel couldn't help but feel like a fish out of water. She tried to focus on the conversations around her, but the words felt distant, like they were coming from another world. The party was in full swing, and she was supposed to be playing the part of the perfect girlfriend, but inside, she felt anything but that. James was by her side, his hand resting casually on her back, guiding her through the crowd, but her mind kept drifting. The more she observed the people around her, the more she realized how out of place she really was. The laughter, the polished conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, it all felt like a show, and she was just a prop. As they moved through the party, Rachel found herself wondering what it would be like to belong here. Would it feel different? Would she feel different? She shook off the thought, forcing a smile as James introduced her to another group of well-dressed guests. He was the perfect host, charming and composed, his words smooth like velvet. He never missed a beat, never seemed uncomfortable in this world. Rachel, on the other hand, felt like a shadow next to him. "This is Rachel," James said with a smile that could sell anything. "My date for the evening." The people around them nodded politely, some offering forced smiles, others eyeing Rachel with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Rachel could feel their eyes on her, but she did her best to ignore them, offering her best charming smile in return. Then it happened. As they moved across the room, Rachel's eyes locked onto a familiar face. The woman across the room was looking straight at her, her ex, the woman who had once been James's everything. Her face was a perfect picture of grace and elegance, her eyes cold and piercing as they met Rachel's. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She was here. Of course, she was. This was her event. This was supposed to be her night. And yet, here Rachel was, standing in the very spot where she had once thought she would never belong. She felt a flash of insecurity hit her. Was she just a filler? Was she just the one James hired to show off in front of his ex? As if on cue, James seemed to notice Rachel's discomfort. He leaned in, his voice low and reassuring. "Don't worry about her," he whispered. "Just focus on the night. We're here for a reason." Rachel nodded, trying to convince herself that it wasn't about the ex or the judgment in her eyes. She wasn't here for anyone else but herself. Well, herself and the money, she reminded herself. But the more she stayed close to James, the more she began to wonder if there was more to this. Maybe it wasn't just about money for him either. Maybe there was something else. As the night wore on, Rachel tried her best to keep her mind focused, but it wasn't easy. She kept catching glimpses of the woman across the room, always watching, always calculating. James didn't seem to care, or maybe he was just too caught up in the social game to notice. But Rachel? She felt it. She felt the weight of the woman's gaze. The tension in the room was palpable. Every smile from James, every compliment he gave her, felt like it was for show. And yet, when their eyes met, she saw something else. There was something deeper behind his usual cool exterior, something he was hiding. He was looking at her as if he didn't want her to be a fake date anymore. "Let's take a walk," James said suddenly, breaking Rachel from her thoughts. He took her hand and led her out to the balcony, away from the prying eyes of the party. The cold night air hit Rachel as they stepped outside. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly. James, noticing her discomfort, took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "I know this is weird," he said softly, his voice almost vulnerable. "But I want you to know this isn't just about my ex. I didn't hire you just for this party. He trailed off, his words hanging in the air. Rachel looked up at him, her heart racing. She had no idea what he was trying to say, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a game. It didn't feel like a business deal. It felt real. He wasn't just the rich guy who hired a woman for the night. He was someone who was trying to reach out, someone who wanted more than just a facade. But Rachel couldn't help but feel conflicted. Could she trust him? Was this just another part of his act? Or was he really showing a side of himself she hadn't seen before? She didn't have time to figure it out. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the door opening behind them. James's ex had arrived on the balcony, her eyes cold and calculating. "You two look cozy," she remarked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Rachel felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't going to be easy. James sighed, standing up straighter, his hand still on Rachel's shoulder. "Just leave us alone," he said firmly, his voice no longer the smooth, charming one from inside. It was different now, more commanding. The ex stared at him for a long moment before smirking and walking away. Rachel looked up at James, surprised. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, but she couldn't help but feel like the game was far from over. The night was still young, and they were far from done pretending. The night continued to unfold, and Rachel was still trying to make sense of everything. The tension between her and James had shifted, but she couldn't quite tell if it was a genuine connection or just another part of the game. The events of the evening seemed to blend together in a haze of forced smiles, glances exchanged behind the scenes, and the uncomfortable feeling of being on display. After the encounter with James's ex on the balcony, things had cooled down, but not entirely. As they returned to the party, Rachel noticed something she hadn't before. James seemed different. He wasn't the same man who had hired her to play a role in his life for one night. The carefully constructed facade had begun to crack. His eyes were no longer just focused on the social game, no longer just performing for the guests. Rachel caught him looking at her in a way that made her heart skip a beat, like he was seeing her for the first time. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to the others, but Rachel felt it. She was still trying to figure out what it all meant when the night took another turn. The music had softened, and people began to drift toward the exit. The night was winding down, but the tension between James and Rachel was far from over. The moment they were alone again, James pulled her aside, away from the crowd. This time, there was no pretension, no performance. Just the two of them, standing in the dim light of the empty hallway. "Rachel," he started, his voice more serious now, the playful tone from earlier completely gone. "I need to tell you something." Her heart raced as she waited for him to continue. She had no idea what to expect, but she felt the weight of his words before they even left his lips. "I didn't hire you just because I needed a date," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I asked you here because I felt something real." Rachel's mind was racing, her thoughts spinning. She wasn't sure what to say. "James, but he cut her off, his voice softer now. "I know it's crazy. I know it doesn't make sense. But the moment I saw you, I felt like I knew you. Like this was more than just some business deal." His words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she didn't know how to react. Was he just trying to charm her? Or was there something more? She had to admit, there was a part of her that wanted to believe him, that wanted to believe there was something real here, something more than just a contract, a game, a role to play. But she wasn't sure. The walls she had built around herself to survive this world of wealth and pretense were high, and she wasn't sure she was ready to tear them down. She swallowed hard, her voice shaky. "But what about everything else? What about your ex? The people at this party? What do I mean in all of this?" James's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I can't promise it'll be easy. I can't promise everything will be perfect. But I can promise that this is real. And I don't want to pretend anymore." Rachel's heart fluttered in her chest. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of getting hurt, of being just another pawn in someone else's game, held her back. She pulled her hand away, unsure of how to respond. "James, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can just trust you." He stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice laced with frustration but also understanding. "I've been hiding behind this act for so long. I don't know how to just be myself. But I'm willing to try for you." The sincerity in his voice struck her. Was it possible? Could someone like him, someone who had everything, truly be vulnerable enough to open up to someone like her? Rachel didn't have an answer. She was too lost in the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. But as the moments passed and the silence stretched between them, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was something here worth exploring. Maybe it wasn't just a game anymore. Maybe they could both find something real in this mess of uncertainty. But just as she was about to speak, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, interrupting the fragile moment they had shared. It was James's ex again, walking toward them with a smug expression on her face. Rachel's stomach twisted in knots. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The woman was back, and this time, she wasn't about to let Rachel off so easily. As she approached, Rachel braced herself for whatever was coming next. The woman's eyes were cold, calculating, as she looked at Rachel, then at James. Still playing. Pretend, I see, the ex said with a raised eyebrow, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Rachel felt a surge of frustration but held her ground, refusing to back down. I'm not pretending, she replied, her voice steady despite the tension. And neither is James. The ex's smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, turning on her heel and walking away without another word. James watched her go, then turned to Rachel, his eyes filled with both regret and determination. I'm sorry about her, but she won't be a problem anymore. I promise you that. Rachel nodded, though she wasn't sure what that promise really meant. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. But one thing was certain. This night, this moment, had changed something in her. She just wasn't sure if it was for the better. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, the tension between Rachel and James hanging in the air like a thick fog. Despite everything that had happened, despite the promises and the uncertainty, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. He wasn't just the man who had hired her to be his fake date. There was something more. And she couldn't ignore the way he had looked at her earlier, the way he had promised he was willing to try. But the party was winding down, and as guests started to leave, Rachel felt the familiar weight of doubt settle in. Was she just a distraction for him? Or was this real? She glanced around, trying to focus on something, anything other than the confusing emotions swirling inside her. But it was hard to think clearly with the whirlwind of emotions and the nagging voice in her head telling her to be careful. Rachel, James said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. She turned to find him standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, looking like he was deep in thought. You okay? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Rachel hesitated, feeling the weight of his gaze. Was she okay? She wasn't sure anymore. I'm just thinking, she replied softly. About everything. James stepped closer, his expression softening. I know this has been a lot, he said, his voice low and reassuring. And I know you probably don't trust me, but I need you to know that I want this to be real. I want to make things right. I don't know how to do that yet. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. There it was again, that vulnerability she hadn't expected. She had thought he was just playing a game, that he had hired her to fill a role, but now she wasn't so sure. I don't know what to believe, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You say you want this to be real, but I'm not sure if I can trust that. I've been lied to before, James. I don't want to get hurt again. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and the raw honesty in her voice surprised even her. She had kept her guard up for so long, but something about him, something about the way he was looking at her, made her want to let it down. James was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face as if he was trying to figure out what to say. Then, without warning, he reached out and gently took her hand in his. Rachel tensed for a moment, but his touch was warm, steady, and comforting. I understand, he said softly. I've been where you are, Rachel. I've been hurt, I've been closed off. But I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. For you. For us. She looked down at their joined hands, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. Was he telling the truth? Or was this just another act? She didn't know, but for the first time tonight, she felt like maybe she could trust him. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't all a game. I need time, she said, looking up at him. I need to know you mean it. I need to know you're not just pretending. James nodded, his expression solemn. I'll give you all the time you need, he said. I'll prove it to you, Rachel. I swear. There was a long pause, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the sound of a car door slamming broke the silence. Rachel turned to see a black limousine waiting outside, the driver standing by the door. It was time to leave. I guess it's time to go, she said, pulling her hand away from his. James gave a small nod, but before she could turn to leave, he reached out and gently took her arm. Can I walk you to the car? He asked. She looked up at him, her heart beating faster. She didn't know what this was between them, but the way he was looking at her, the way he was holding himself, made her want to take a chance. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. I'd like that. They walked to the car in silence, the cool night air wrapping around them as they stepped outside. The city lights flickered in the distance, and Rachel couldn't help but feel like something was shifting. Something was changing. Maybe it was too soon to know for sure, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. James opened the car door for her, and she slid into the back seat, feeling his eyes on her as she settled in. "I'll be in touch," he said, his voice low. "This isn't the end, Rachel. It's just the beginning." Rachel didn't know what the future held, but as the car drove off into the night, she felt a flicker of hope stir in her heart. Maybe this wasn't all a game after all. Maybe there was something real here. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to find out. The car ride felt longer than it actually was, each mile ticking by with the sound of the tires humming against the pavement. Rachel sat in the back seat, her thoughts swirling in a mix of confusion and curiosity. She had come to this party tonight with a purpose, to do a job, to play a role. But now, everything felt different. James had promised her time, promised to prove that this wasn't all just a game. And yet, part of her still couldn't fully believe it. The city lights outside the window blurred as they passed, the world moving in a haze. Was she being too cautious? Was she protecting herself too much? Or was she simply being smart? James had taken her hand earlier, and in that moment, there had been no pretension, no performance, just a man who was trying to be vulnerable, trying to show her something real. But was she ready to trust that? She had always been the one to keep her distance, the one who watched from the sidelines, never truly letting anyone in. She didn't know how to change that, how to let someone else in. Maybe she was afraid of being hurt again, or maybe she was just too used to being alone. The car slowed, and Rachel was pulled from her thoughts as the driver pulled up to the curb in front of a sleek, modern building. The limousine came to a stop, and Rachel looked up to see James standing outside the door, waiting for her. He had already opened the door for her, his face calm, yet his eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. Her heart was racing, her mind torn between wanting to walk away and wanting to take a chance. She had promised herself that she wouldn't get involved, that she wouldn't let anyone break down the walls she had spent so long building. But as she stood there, looking at James, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go. "Are you ready?" James asked softly, his voice almost tentative, as if he was waiting for her to say no, waiting for her to push him away. Rachel met his gaze, searching his eyes for any sign of insincerity, any sign that he was still playing a game. But she found none. Instead, she found a quiet sincerity, an openness that made her heart skip a beat. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so." They walked into the building together, the cool air of the lobby hitting Rachel's face as they passed through the doors. The interior was sleek and minimalist, a perfect reflection of James's wealth and success. She had never been in a place like this before. Everything was so polished, so perfect. It almost felt like she didn't belong here. But as James led her deeper into the building, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to belong somewhere. They entered a private elevator, and James pressed the button for the top floor. The doors slid shut with a soft, smooth motion, and the two of them were alone in the small space. For the first time that night, Rachel felt the quiet tension between them, the unspoken words that hung in the air. James didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he stared ahead, his jaw set with determination. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, as if preparing to say something important. Rachel couldn't help but feel her heart racing. What was he about to say? "I know this is all happening so fast," James said after a moment, his voice low and steady. "But I can't help how I feel. I've spent so much time building this life, this empire, but I've never truly let anyone in. Not like this." Rachel felt the weight of his words, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She had always been the one to keep people at a distance, to keep her emotions in check. But something about James made her want to let go of the walls she had built, to trust him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. "I'm not asking you to rush into anything," he continued, his voice softer now. "I just want to be honest with you. I don't want to hide anymore." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped out into a luxurious penthouse. The space was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city below. Rachel couldn't help but feel small, overwhelmed by the sheer size and opulence of the place. But as she looked at James, standing there beside her, she realized that this wasn't just about the wealth, or the grandeur. It was about the connection between them, the unspoken bond that had formed over the course of the night. She had thought it was all just a game, a charade. But now, she wasn't so sure. As James walked toward the living room, he turned to her and gave a small, nervous smile. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his tone apologetic. "But I want you to know that this is real. And I want to take the time to show you that." Rachel felt her heart flutter in her chest. Was it possible? Could this really be real? Could she let go of her fear and take a chance on someone like James? She didn't have an answer, but as she looked at him, something deep inside her stirred. Maybe this was the beginning of something more. Something real. Something worth trusting. As Rachel stepped further into the penthouse, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and confusion. The space was everything she had imagined, sleek, modern, and extravagant, but it was also so much more. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, with the city lights sparkling like a sea of stars beneath her, just playing a part for her benefit. Maybe there was something real here. But before she could respond, there was a soft knock on the door, interrupting the moment. James looked up, his expression briefly shifting to one of annoyance before it softened again. "It's fine," he said, squeezing her hand before standing up. "Just a moment." He walked over to the door, and Rachel sat there, her mind still spinning. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, but it felt like something important. The knock came again, this time more insistent. James opened the door, revealing a young man in a suit, holding a briefcase. Rachel couldn't help but notice the tension in the air between them, as the man spoke quickly in hushed tones. "Everything is set," the man said, glancing at Rachel before returning his attention to James. "But there's a problem with the financials. We need to make a decision now." James's face hardened, and he nodded curtly. "I'll be right there," he replied, before turning back to Rachel. "Sorry about this. I have some business to take care of. Stay here, please. I'll be back soon." Rachel nodded, but a part of her felt like the moment had shifted. It wasn't just about the connection they were building. Now, there was something else, the weight of his world, the pressure of his responsibilities, the things that came with his wealth and position. James walked out, leaving Rachel alone in the vast, empty space. She looked around, her fingers lightly brushing against the soft fabric of the sofa, feeling the weight of the silence settle around her. It was strange. This place was beautiful, but it didn't feel like home. It didn't feel like it could ever be hers. She thought about the promise James had made earlier. He had said he would show her who he really was, but now, it felt like his world was pulling him away from her. What was she supposed to do with that? How was she supposed to trust someone who was constantly pulled in so many directions? As she sat there, lost in thought, she felt the ache of loneliness creep back in. She had spent so many years on her own, relying only on herself. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone else in. And yet, part of her longed to. Part of her wanted to believe that James wasn't just another rich man who could buy his way out of his problems. She wanted to believe that there was more to him than the image he projected. But the longer she sat there, waiting, the more unsure she became. She heard the soft click of the door opening, and looked up to see James stepping back into the room. His face was more serious now, his shoulders tense. "I'm sorry about that," he said, his voice apologetic. "But it's over now. We can focus on us again." Rachel didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure what to believe. But as he walked back toward her, his eyes softening, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to find out. James stepped closer to Rachel, his expression softer now, the weight of his earlier conversation with the business associate still hanging in the air, but pushed aside for the moment. Rachel looked up at him, unsure of what to say, her heart racing in her chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there was more to him than just the millionaire facade. He had promised her that he was real, that he wasn't just playing a game. But with everything that had happened, she wasn't so sure anymore. She had always been careful, always kept her guard up to protect herself. She wasn't used to letting people in, and this feeling she had around James, was unfamiliar, unsettling even. She opened her mouth to speak, but her words caught in her throat. James, sensing her hesitation, sat down beside her, his posture more relaxed now, his earlier tension easing. "I know I've been a little distracted tonight," he said, his voice calm, almost apologetic. "But I want to be here with you. I want to make this right." I don't want you to feel like this is just some deal or game. I need you to know that I'm serious. Rachel could feel the sincerity in his words, and yet, doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. She looked at him, searching his eyes for any hint of insincerity. She didn't find any. His eyes were steady, vulnerable even, like he was showing her a part of himself he usually kept hidden. It was a side of him she hadn't expected, a side that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could let her guard down. But still, the fear of being hurt kept her from fully letting go. James, I don't know if I can just let myself believe that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust that this is real. I've been hurt before, and I don't want to make the same mistake again. James's expression softened even more, his eyes filled with understanding. He reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. I know you're scared, he said, his voice low and steady. I can see it in your eyes, and I understand why you're hesitant. But I'm not asking you to throw your trust at me blindly. I'm asking you to give me a chance to see if this, what we have, can be real, if it's worth pursuing. Rachel felt the weight of his words, felt the sincerity in them deep in her chest. She had never expected this from him. She had expected the same cold, calculated businessman who hired her for a job, who treated everything like a transaction. But now, as he sat beside her, holding her hand and looking at her like she was the only person in the world, she realized that maybe she had been wrong about him. Maybe he wasn't just the millionaire, the powerful businessman who used people. Maybe there was more to him, more than just the surface he showed the world. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he could be more than what he seemed. But the fear of being hurt again still lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. I don't want to rush this, she said softly, looking down at their joined hands. I need time. I need to know that this isn't just some phase, that you're not just saying what you think I want to hear. James's grip on her hand tightened slightly, and for a moment, Rachel thought she saw a flash of vulnerability in his eyes. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. Take all the time you need. But I promise you, I'm not just saying this because I think you want to hear it. I'm saying it because it's true. I want you in my life, Rachel. Not as a fake date, not as someone I hired for the night. I want to get to know you, really get to know you. Rachel looked up at him, her heart racing. His words hit her harder than she expected. Could it really be this simple? Could she really let herself trust him? For the first time that night, the fear that had held her back seemed to fade, just a little. She wanted to take a chance, wanted to believe that there was something real here, that maybe they both could find something worth holding on to. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll give you a chance. But you have to prove it to me, James. You have to show me that this isn't just some fleeting thing. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and for the first time since they had met, Rachel felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. I will, he said, his voice full of determination. I'll show you, Rachel. I promise. As the words settled between them, Rachel felt the weight of the moment, felt the possibility of something new, something real, beginning to bloom. It wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't ready to let go of her walls completely, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The next few days passed in a blur for Rachel, each moment blending into the next as she tried to process everything that had happened. She had agreed to give James a chance, but it wasn't as easy as she thought it would be. Every time they were together, there was that nagging voice in the back of her mind, reminding her of the walls she had built over the years to protect herself. But as she spent more time with James, something inside her began to shift. He wasn't like the other men she had known. He wasn't just playing a role. There was something genuine about him, something real that made her want to trust him. But still, she couldn't shake the fear that had held her back for so long. She had been hurt before, and it wasn't easy to let go of that pain. But James was patient. Every time she pulled away, he would patiently wait for her to come back. And she did. Slowly she started letting him in. Slowly, she started to see the man behind the millionaire facade. It wasn't easy, but with each conversation, with each moment they shared, she began to feel like she was finally seeing the real James. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. It was a quiet moment, just the two of them, No pretenses, no games. James looked at her, his eyes soft and warm, and for a moment, everything felt right. I'm glad you're here, he said quietly, breaking the silence. Rachel looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never expected to be here, in this moment, with him. She had never expected to feel this way. I am too, she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James smiled, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. I know it hasn't been easy, he said, his voice full of sincerity. And I know I've made mistakes. But I'm trying, Rachel. I really am. Rachel nodded, her chest tight with the emotions she was trying to keep at bay. She had heard those words before, but something in his voice told her that he meant them this time. He wasn't just saying what she wanted to hear. He was being honest with her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could trust him. I know, she said softly, squeezing his hand. I can see that. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that only comes when two people are truly connected, when words aren't needed to communicate. It was in the way their hands fit together, in the way their eyes met, understanding without having to say a word. James leaned back, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I don't know what the future holds, he said, his voice distant but hopeful. But I know that I want you in it, Rachel. I want to build something real with you, something lasting. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm not going anywhere. Rachel felt her heart race, her breath catching in her throat. She had always been afraid of the future, afraid of what it might hold. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel that fear. She felt something else, hope. The kind of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. I want that too, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I need to know that you're not just saying it because you think it's what I want to hear. I need to know that this is real. James turned to her, his expression serious. It's real, Rachel, he said firmly. I'm not here for some temporary thing. I'm here because I want you. I want this, us, to work. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it happen. Rachel stared at him, her heart full. She had been so afraid of being hurt, of opening herself up to someone who might not be what they seemed. But as she looked at James, she realized that he was showing her something she hadn't expected, vulnerability. Real, raw vulnerability. And that made all the difference. She smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. Okay, she said, her voice steady now. I believe you. James's eyes lit up, and for the first time that evening, the tension between them seemed to melt away. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a warm embrace. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. This was just the beginning, and though she didn't know what the future would bring, she felt a sense of peace knowing that they were facing it together. The city stretched out before them, the lights flickering in the distance, and in that moment, everything felt right. They were no longer just two people playing a role. They were two people who had found something real, something worth fighting for. Weeks passed since that quiet moment on the balcony, and Rachel found herself in a place she had never thought possible. She had let go of her fears, opened her heart, and started to trust James, not the millionaire or the businessman, but the man who had shown her vulnerability and sincerity. They spent more time together, getting to know each other in ways that went beyond the surface. Rachel had always believed that love was a game, something people played until they got hurt. But with James, she was beginning to see that love could be something real, something lasting. He was patient with her, never pushing too hard, always there when she needed him. They shared their dreams, their fears, and the quiet moments in between. One evening, as they sat in his penthouse, watching the sunset, James turned to her, his eyes soft. I've been thinking a lot lately, he began, his voice steady. About us. About what we want from life. Rachel looked at him, her heart racing. She had always been afraid to think about the future, but with James, it felt like the future was something they could build together. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James smiled, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. I mean, I've never met anyone like you before, Rachel. I've built my entire life around business, around success, but none of that means anything without someone to share it with. And I want to share it with you. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected him to say those words. never thought she would hear him speak so openly about his feelings. It was as if everything they had been through, all the moments of doubt and uncertainty, had led them here, to this moment of clarity. "James," she started, but he interrupted her, squeezing her hand. "Wait, just listen for a minute. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I've realized that I don't want to waste any more time. I want you to be a part of my life, Rachel. Not just for now, but for the long run. I'm asking you to be with me, for real. No more pretending, no more games." Rachel felt her heart swell as she listened to him. He wasn't asking her to make some grand gesture, wasn't trying to rush her into something she wasn't ready for. He was simply telling her how he felt, and in that moment, Rachel knew that he was being genuine. She had been afraid of trusting him, afraid of being hurt, but now, she realized that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. "I want that too," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I want to be with you, James. I'm ready." A smile spread across his face. And for the first time, Rachel saw the joy in his eyes, the joy of a man who had found something worth holding on to. He pulled her into a tight embrace, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I promise I'll never let you go," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had found something real, something worth fighting for. And she was ready to take that leap with James, no matter what came next. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of change. Rachel and James began to build their life together, learning how to navigate the complexities of their relationship while balancing the demands of their separate worlds. They spent weekends away together, explored new places, and shared their hopes and fears for the future. It wasn't always easy, but they were committed to making it work. One afternoon, after months of building their lives together, James took Rachel to a quiet spot by the lake, a place they had visited before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was crisp with the scent of autumn. James took Rachel's hand, his gaze steady and serious. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his voice low. Rachel looked up at him, her heart beating faster. She could feel the weight of the moment, the anticipation in the air. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James dropped to one knee, taking her hand in his, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as he looked up at her, his eyes filled with love and determination. "Rachel, will you marry me?" The words hung in the air, and Rachel's heart soared. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, couldn't believe how far they had come since that night at the party. She had never imagined that this was where their journey would take them, but now, standing there with him, she realized that this was exactly where she was meant to be. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." James's face lit up with pure joy as he stood up, pulling her into a tight embrace. They kissed, the world around them fading into the background as they shared that moment of perfect happiness. In that moment, Rachel knew that they had both found something rare and beautiful, a love that had grown from trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to take risks. As they walked back to the car hand in hand, Rachel couldn't help but smile. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment. And now, as they looked ahead to their future together, Rachel felt like the luckiest woman in the world. They had built something real, something lasting, and nothing could tear them apart.